Thank you. All right, thanks to CPX to having me back this week. I was in New Orleans last week, slightly different weather than I'm experiencing here today. But I'd like to start off with a true story about fake news. So, the very first time I left the United States was in 1993, and I flew to El Salvador. I was a college student, and I was on exchange with one of my classmates for the Spanish language. And when I landed there, everywhere I would go, I got treated amazingly. Now, my Spanish was terrible. I just barely made it over the hurdle to go on this trip. My classmate who was with me, much better Spanish, but they treated him, they didn't really care if he was there. Now, everywhere I went, they would say, Mr. Clinton, Mr. Clinton, what would you like? Would you like drinks? Would you like to eat? Do you want to set up here on the stage? And my escorts would go with me everywhere. They got great access. My other classmate, not so much. I'd have to be like, let Joe come with me. Let's have Joe. And they go, okay, you can bring your friend with you. Everywhere I went, this went on. And every time we left, my escorts would snicker just a little bit. On about the third trip, one of the leaders there in El Salvador says, Mr. Clinton, please tell your father, thank you very much. Thank you very much for everything he does. My dad was a teacher in the state of Missouri. In the middle of the United States, I was pretty sure he had no idea where El Salvador was. I said, okay, I'll make sure and tell him when I get back. This went on all the way to the very end of the trip. They present me with a plaque, and it says, thank you to Watts Clinton for visiting El Salvador. My escorts snicker, they take me to the airport, and they laugh, and they said, just wanted to let you know, everywhere we went, we told them that you were President Clinton's son. And on every piece of paper, we erased the comma between Watts and Clinton. Now, how is that possible? Fast forward 10 years, 2003, someone would have had the internet, and they would have come in and said, nowhere on the internet does it say President Clinton has a son. He has a daughter. We don't know of any sons that are out there. Fast forward even 5 to 10 more years, anyone in El Salvador would have had a cell phone, and they would have probably looked it up, and they would have said, this is a lie. Obviously, he doesn't have a son. This guy's Spanish is terrible. We've been, giving prime access to his escorts everywhere he went. But fast forward 10 more years. Let's say it's today. What if before I made that trip, I made a website which says that President Clinton has a son, and I take pictures of myself and I post it all over social media, or I get a social bot and go out onto social media and spam it out there? I might be able to pull it off for a day or two. In 1993, we knew very little. We had very little information we could access, but we were pretty sure or pretty certain about what we had. Today, we have more information than ever, and yet we're less certain about what the truth is. It's becoming more and more difficult to find. In those mid-2000s, as cell phones were coming on board, I worked with a team. We were tracking terrorists around the world. Not using some sophisticated cyber techniques, we used this tool called YouTube. Maybe you've heard of it. It turns out they were filming themselves. All you had to do was watch. Our students would say, sir, you were telling me all about this terrorist group. Here are 10 videos of them in Iraq. Fast forward 5 more years, all of them had moved to most of the mainstream social media applications. I would have conversations with people in Somalia on Twitter. You could watch them on Facebook. You could watch them even on Instagram. At the same point, though, it was seen as a tool for democracy. As we all know, Facebook and Twitter overthrew authoritarian regimes during the Arab Spring. They were the heroes of democracy. Or is that the case? 5 years later, by 2016, everyone's very angry at those social media companies for tearing down democracy. So is it the social media companies, or is it us? That is the question I want to explore today. What I came to learn when I was watching and going through this experience was there was a rise of trolls, troll armies, which you all know mostly as your uncles. These individuals were extremely angry on social media, and I would get trolled pretty continuously. If I went on television before I even came out of the interview, I would have wonderful pictures like this show up all over social media of me. Apparently, they don't use spell check, but never mind that. Those are indicators, and we would begin to track them. What was interesting is they had a mission. They were there to discredit me. They wanted to sow mistrust, and they wanted to advance narratives against me. But the more we looked, I worked with two colleagues, the more we looked, we started to pick up other patterns. Oftentimes there would be lovely ladies that needed to talk to you about your political views. You just needed to match with them and they would send you a direct message. And what would be in that direct message? Maybe some malware, maybe a story. Other times they would be political partisans, and behind them you could see schools of hackers lined up. They would work with those honeypots to actually penetrate people's accounts. They loved to go after companies. If they could get into a company's databases, they would be able to pull down all of that sensitive information. They could maybe even pull down compromising information that, if disclosed out to the public, would hurt that company and their interest. By 2014 and 15, you would see widespread attacks against corporations. Maybe it's a fake terrorist attack that sends Walt Disney stocks down just a little bit. Or it could be a fake chemical plant attack that's taken from pictures long ago. Others, the most well-known of them was the Associated Press's Twitter account, gets hacked into, and a claim that President Obama has been hurt sends the stock market down hundreds of points almost instantaneously before it rebounds. Poisoned turkeys at Walmart in 2015, that turned out not to be true, and even using citizen journalist websites to plant fake stories at different times. The idea behind this was to scare people. There's 4 messages, if you're doing disinformation, that you try and advance. The first is calamitous messaging. If you can scare an audience, if you can make them feel fear, not only will they follow you to get news updates, they will also fall back on their biases. Anybody seen coronavirus disinformation in the past 2 to 3 weeks? Fear. Fear will shock the system and make you believe things that you would not otherwise tend to believe. The second type of message that you oftentimes will see will be financial. You can scare people about their finances, but you can also attack an opponent, attack a corporation that is competing against you. It's a new tool. Rather than just simply trying to beat them financially, you actually beat them with information. The third is how you infiltrate audiences. You do that with social messages. Get into people's communities through social messages. And then the last and fourth message is turn them on their political views. Drive them to an outcome that you want to achieve. We've watched this now over 5 to 6 years, and it's become a very effective low-cost strategy, not just for nations, but a whole host of interest groups, corporations, lobbyists, public relations groups. How did we get there? How did we go from the internet bringing us all together to social media tearing us all apart? It comes because of the way our internet has grown over time and how it's brought us together. If you look back to the late 1990s, there was extreme optimism about the internet. As we all know, the internet brought us all together, and now we buy each other Coca-Colas and we smile and we get along great. Or did that happen? The idea of the internet was preference, that you could actually choose everything that you wanted to access. And by the late 1990s, people were talking about preference as the ultimate goal of the internet. You can choose everything you want. And that if you choose everything you want, you will be happy. And we all know this is true, right? When you get everything you want, you become immediately happy. Or not so much. About 2011, there was a guy named Eli Pariser who came up with the concept of filter bubbles. The idea that when you Google, Bing, search, any internet search engine, you actually get different results based on your preferences, who they think you are, what your demographics are. That has been turned up 10 times with social media. Social media is designed to deliver you what you want from people that look like you and talk like you. It is a disaster for disinformation and misinformation. Why? Because you are choosing, you are making preferences. What people don't realize, particularly young people when I talk to them, is when you look in this phone, you are the only one that sees this version of the world. It is specifically tailored to you, to get you to buy things, to get you to look at things, to get you to come back to things over and over again. Your preferences are as much a part of it as the algorithm. You like, you share, you retweet, you block. Every time you do, you put yourself into a preference bubble of your own design. Today, the social media tail actually wags the physical world. It brings you into a physical world that is shaped by your beliefs in terms of your information. There's no separation between virtual and real. They're integrated together. How does this work? There are three biases to always think about. One is confirmation bias, and this is why social media companies can't fix this for people. It is designed to deliver you information that you want. Social media companies can't make a social media application you want to come and use that delivers you things you don't want. You would not use them. Confirmation bias. The second bias is implicit bias. If you look through all psychological, sociological research, you will tend to find that people want information from people that look like them and talk like them. And who are your friends on all these social media applications? They are people oftentimes that look like you, talk like you, work where you work, think like you think. You are putting yourself in a bubble whether you realize it or not because you're getting preferred information. And this leads to the third very dangerous dynamic over time, which is status quo bias. Once you are in your digital tribe, you only want to speak things you think your digital tribe will like. If you say something the tribe doesn't like, the tribe could push you out, or they could challenge you, and you would lower your status in the tribe. These three biases have created dramatic effects in all of Western societies. The first one I call clickbait populism, which is the promotion of popular content and opinions and the personas that voice them. The more you send something out the crowd likes, the more followers you get. The more followers you get, the more they like you. The more they like you, the more you can dictate to your crowd how they should think, how they should feel, and what they should believe. This accrual of support. People don't become leaders based on their abilities as much as how good they are on social media. This provides a lot of power to people who don't know very much. All you have to do is get people to like things, and now you can tell them what they should like, and they will probably like it because they want to stay in the tribe. We already see the effects of social media influencers, particularly in the United States, but even elsewhere, becoming political leaders. We used to say, hey, an elected leader needs to be good on television so they can get elected. Now they have to be good on social media, which has led to lots of very old political candidates in the United States trying to film themselves in their kitchens, and the videos are terrible and awfully boring. This will expand over the next 15 to 20 years to where a social media influencer has far more power than actually people that work in their field. When you talk to young people today, especially in the United States, one of the common things I say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they were like, I'm already what I want to be, and I want to be a social media influencer. Strange. When I was a kid, people would say, I want to be an actor and be famous so I can go to Hollywood and people will pay attention to me. Now they say, well, I can just be myself in my kitchen and film myself and I'll be just as powerful or just as famous. It's a very different phenomenon from what it used to be. The next thing that this leads to is social media nationalism. This is the collective adherence to a set of beliefs that are communicated through hashtags, avatars, popular statements, account bios that look the same. When we look through how influence happens, almost always people will tend to replicate the same phrases, same hashtags. These transcend physical borders. So it ends up that people have stronger allegiance to a digital tribe than their physical nation. They will know far more about somebody, or maybe somebody they think is somebody, way on the other side of the planet, and know nothing about their neighbor. This changing of the world also comes from the fact that people spend so much time on devices. The average time on phones, depending on the survey, is between 3 and 5 hours. For young people, it can be 8 hours a day on average, 8 hours a day on a device. If you were spending 8 hours of your day looking at a device, that's 8 hours you're not spending with people that are around you. This will fundamentally change how society interacts in the future. It will make it very easy to trade on your neighbors because you don't know them. As long as it's 72 degrees, constant Wi-Fi, you will not be overtaken by the matrix. You will enlist in the matrix. You will gladly join the matrix because it feels way better than real life. That social media nationalism will change the way people interact and even how societies interact, really begging the question about physical nations. What will they be? And maybe we will integrate into virtual nations as much as physical ones. The third part is what I call death of expertise. There's a guy I work with named Tom Nichols. He's on television with me sometimes. And that's the belief that anyone that has a connection to the internet is as smart on any topic ever as anybody else in the entire world. We all know if you have kids, particularly in high school, they know this is to be true. They're smarter than their parents on everything. And this leads to people having access to more information, but yet understanding less. Part of the reason we've had conspiracies advance so far around the world in recent years is because there aren't checks that are naturally there. People are talking about all sorts of things that they don't understand. How could we ever have a cruise dedicated to the Flat Earth Society, the belief that the Earth is flat? You're on a cruise. You literally go over the horizon. You cannot see the other side because the Earth is round. Think about this. You could not do that without the internet and social media. You couldn't bring such a collective of people together. How did we get there? 5 generations of what I call advanced persistent manipulators. We talked about advanced persistent threats in the cyberspace. They are a part of this ecosystem that has come up now. If you remember back, this trend really started at the end of 2000s. Some of the most successful hackers, the hacktivists that were out there, what was their mission? It was to expose corruption. It was to break into people's systems. It was to deface websites. They were hacking to power influence. The next group that came along were those terrorists that I saw. What did they do? They operated on multiple platforms to engage multiple audiences in different languages around a common cause, bringing people physical migrations into places like Syria. Next level that came on was bringing all of those parts together. Do hacking to power influence, do multimedia, do multi-platform social media integration, and create what I call a disinformation fusion center, a troll farm. Bring people together and you act as though you're people that look like and talk like the audience that you are engaging. We are now in the 4th era, which I call trolling as a service. That is essentially all of these services are openly available, and you're starting to see companies jump into this game. You go and buy some social bots. You hire people to do hacking for you. You might even build your own disinformation system, or you could outsource it. And that has led to open capabilities. We used to talk about malware farms, if you remember, in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Now we're talking about social bot farms. Who can make a bot for me? Who can write a newspaper article and get it placed? These services are available on the dark web. And what's on the horizon is what I call the 5th generation. That's complete system dominance. That's censorship, surveillance, social scoring. You say what I like, and if you don't get very many points. You don't get very many points, you won't get a loan or a job or go to the school that you want. That's changing the way the entire architecture works. This evolution is no different than what we saw in cyber. I'm sure you all remember who the first hacker was. His name was Matthew Broderick in the movie War Games, right? That was a confidentiality attack. It was just kind of fun. Then you look at the escalation a few years later, Matthew Broderick again and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He does an integrity attack where he's changing. Then what happens? Actors build on top of each other. The same thing is happening today. Today you have corporations, even individuals, wealthy individuals who have the capability to build their own media outlet, their own hacking services. They could use a social media application with a custom malware to hack into something to then disclose information about a business executive. This just happened in the last few weeks. We learned about some of these stories and how this is sort of playing. It also leads to the breakdown of information because what you see as I look at this on the bottom left-hand corner is the most sophisticated manipulators are trying to shape your reality. The basic stuff, what hacktivists used to do, even what extremist groups did as they were trying to rally people to places like Syria and Iraq, is very small now. All they could do was maybe influence an audience or discredit somebody. But shaping a person's reality, making educational outlets, making fake universities, creating fake think tanks that support your version of history. You can literally go back now and rewrite all of history in such a way that when we talked about 1984, it is now coming up on 2024, and people will have the ability to do that. In the middle are all of these methods, and this is what my team works on today. We track who is doing all of these things, who's actually building the capabilities to do these things. Who are the best deep fake makers, shallow fake makers? Who's doing real world provocations that look real but actually are just sort of artificially developed? Or even more scary, who is building a pseudoscience that is somewhat believable so that they can convince an audience of what to believe and what to think? This dangerous new world, there are lots of actors and methods out here. And what I want to leave for you as you think about this, because you are entering this world, and now it's not just about hacking or defending systems. That is essential. But you'll need new ideas, you'll see new concepts, and you'll need new tools to really deal with this. The big one is disinformation for hire. Do you know what your competitors might do or what links they might go to, those competitors against your company, to actually do brand reputation destruction, put out fake news stories, to actually undermine your products because they're putting out false information? The second part is what I talked about in terms of the younger generation, which is social media influencers as a weapon. The most sophisticated technique I see now, whether it's a nation state, a corporation, or a wealthy media outlet, is identifying social media influencers and inserting their narrative in their speeches. You go out, you make a video, and you just drop in there over and over and over again the same message over and over and over again. Then you go and amplify that with social bots out on social media. Building these think tanks, these fake universities, takes time. You have to actually put together the content. You have to know just enough to make it believable. And there's a whole industry, a cottage industry right now, of building false information and backstopping. In fact, you might get a resume dropped in at your company, and you will go and click on all of the links in that resume, and it will take you to a website that looks like a university in a foreign country. But how often do you actually call that foreign university and say, do you even exist? Did this person ever graduate? Very rarely do we do that. You've heard a lot about social bots. People love to talk about social bots. It's something that gets people excited, but they're really changing. Social bots, when I used to get trolled, you would fire back at them, and the cheapest bots wouldn't even answer. The more sophisticated bots might answer every once in a while, but they would be operating, essentially one operator would operate 10 or 100 accounts. They didn't have time to respond back. But what if I create a bot that's an entire community of fake accounts that talk to each other? You will enter into that conversation. It'll be almost impossible to know that you're not in a conversation with real people. And if I operate all of these personalities, which just through artificial intelligence, machine learning, talk back and forth to each other, it'd be very hard for you not to know that you're in a fake reality. You're not even in a real conversation. Shallow fakes to deep fakes, synthetic media, the ability to alter this. It doesn't just lead to people being fooled, it leads to apathy. Coronavirus. I was looking at some of the misinformation around coronavirus. I saw lots of videos uploaded to social media. I quit looking at them because I could not tell which ones were real. What we need are solutions. Blockchain verification kind of solutions for content at upload so that we know what's there. The last part is what I call crowdfunding as a pathway. There are lots of people out there in this new gig economy that have to fund themselves in their research. So what do? They create a crowdfunding website. If you are a manipulator, this is the greatest thing in the world, right? You can actually fund an alternative media outlet, a social media influencer, and just send them money and tell them, I really like that video that you did, do more like that. And they would say, absolutely, just keep filling my crowdfunding site. This is an interesting pathway that's being exploited right now in terms of influence. How would we ever catch anybody funding a disinfo outlet when there is no record of any disinfo outlet that's out there? So how do we stop this, or how do we deal with this? I'm going to go through the country solutions really quick, but countries have to be the ground basis for science, data, and truth. The other thing is they have to refute falsehoods. If you're a country, you're maligned with a falsehood, and you wait and don't say anything, then what is the next story that comes out? The government is hiding something from you. Well, it was such a crazy conspiracy, maybe the government didn't think they needed to respond to you. The other part is partnering with information rating systems. I would like to see information that comes through social media be rated essentially over time, just like nutrition labels on the back of food. But I want people to know what they are consuming. Is this a news article or an opinion article? What is the track record of this outlet, fact or fiction? Put that rating up there whenever it shows up on a social media feed or a search engine, so that way the consumer knows. I always ask people, in the United States, we have crazy tabloid magazines. I remember as a kid, it would say, an alien has landed in the United States, and I would point to it, and my parents would say, no, that's crazy. Everyone knows that newspaper just makes up stories. But on the internet, people believe all of it, right? An alien landed in the United States. Let me send that to my whole family. Poof. And what do? Two of them will be like, I knew aliens landed there. Poof. And they send it out. I go back to them and I'm like, why did you send that out? And it was like totally believable. But I was like, that magazine, At the grocery store, you didn't believe that at all. Why? I'm like, I don't know. This one just seems real. The psychology of social media has changed our defenses. That's really what I want to move to now as I close out. For companies and agencies, you are in a totally different era where you already know governments can't protect you as corporations, right? You've built up your cyber defenses. You have the tools that you're putting together, but do you have a social media policy for employees and when to engage? Not just cybersecurity, but social media as well. If I do a vulnerability assessment on a company, what time do I always check? 5 p.m. Friday night. 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. on Friday night are the golden hours for vulnerability assessment. Why? You're a little excited the week's over. Maybe you've had a few things to drink. I could engage you, and you might tell me all sorts of things about your coworkers. And what do? I start on Twitter to figure out where you're at. And then what I want to do? I'd want to go to Facebook, right, to know who your community is. But what's the gold mine? LinkedIn. If I get to LinkedIn, I know your family, I know your friends, I know where you work, I know who your boss is, and I know all of your coworkers. I can tell where you've worked before. I can see what your network is. Do your employees understand that? The other part is developing and rehearsing a playbook. Just like we do our playbooks for cyber, whenever we're having a cyber attack, do you respond to a smear campaign? There's always several scenarios I throw at people. A conspiracy comes out. It's retweeted, amplified, shared 100 times. Should you respond? Probably so. The longer you wait to respond, the more the conspiracy takes off. However, a troll who has one follower yells at you, and the company immediately shouts back at the troll. What just happened? They just gave the troll 100 new followers. You have to war game when you should engage and when you shouldn't engage. The last thing to think about is tools. Not just real-time brand protection, but speed is essential. And I'll come to that in the conclusion. Content development and dissemination. How will you quickly put out those press briefings, those refutations, and who will do it? Corporate media, social media account. Do people pay attention to those? No. Who do they pay attention to? Social media influencers. Who's the social media influencer for your brand and for your company, and how can they get that message out and help you amplify and refute it? The last thing is I always have key network monitoring. People mostly try and block out their trolls. I am one of the rare people that love my trolls. I watch my trolls. I pay attention to everything they say because that is your reconnaissance. That's how you know that you have a smear campaign. That's how you know that maybe you've been hacked and data has been dumped out there about you. Love your trolls because they will be the ones that tell you when you need to respond. I'll conclude with this. It ultimately comes down to people and citizens. 1, determine the cost and benefits of social media use. Why do we continue to do something that makes us so miserable? Doesn't make any sense. No one is obligated to use social media, but we still do it. I do it too. I'm guilty of it. I'm not better than anybody else. The other part is valuing human connections more than virtual connections. The person to your left or right, should something go wrong in your life, will actually be there for you. The fake person on Twitter, Facebook, all these social media applications will not. They'll say, sorry, so sorry about what happened. Know the source of the information that you consume. I always give people these 3 tips. Whenever you're taking information on the internet, 3 things to think about. 1, do you physically know where this outlet is and who and where they produce the content? If they won't tell you where they're at, it's probably because they don't want you to know where they're at. Maybe because they're not telling you the truth. The second thing is, do you know who made it? Who are the actual people that made it? Anonymous post, bylines from pseudonyms, it's not really worth your time. The third part is, how do they make their money? If you don't know how they make their money, but they can send you 100 fake news articles a day, chances are they're being funded by somebody who doesn't have your best interests in mind. Listen more than you speak, read more than you write, watch more than you film. Our children will be the first generation that can produce far more content than can consume content in any given day. The last and most important thing that I want to leave with you today is understand what you tend to believe. Through all propaganda, research, psychological warfare, there are 4 things that you will tend to believe. That which you see first, that which you see the most, that which comes from a trusted source, that which is not accompanied by a rebuttal. 4 things. First, most, trusted, no rebuttal. Sound familiar? That's social media for you. Hey, 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 look at this, over again. Trust me, don't trust them, trust me, don't trust them, block them out, they don't know what they're talking about. That's modern politics, by the way. That also is your solution if you're dealing with disinformation in this new information space for your company. First, most trusted, no rebuttal. That means you got to be fast over and over and over again in your rebuttal. You have to be honest in terms of what you put out. And the last part is you have to get in the minds, you've got to get in the space of that audience that you want to convince. Thank you for having me here today at CPX. My book is Messing with the Enemy, and I hope all of you survive in this social media world.